Please respect our decision. Those 5 words were taped to my suitcase when I came home from the hospital after heart surgery. I stood on my own front porch staring at the note while the evening wind pushed dead leaves across the driveway. For a moment, I honestly thought there had been some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe Melissa was upset. Maybe Daniel and I had argued before my surgery, and I'd forgotten something through the medication fog. But then I tried the garage code. The keypad blinked red. Invalid. I tried again more slowly, my fingers trembling from exhaustion and the cold October air. Invalid. That was when I noticed the curtains upstairs move slightly. Someone was inside the house watching me. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment where you're watching from so I can see how far this story reaches. The taxi driver looked uncomfortable standing there beside my luggage. He was a young man, maybe 25, with tired eyes and a coffee stain on his sleeve. Ma'am, he said carefully, do you need help getting somewhere else? Somewhere else. The words hit me harder than the surgery stitches pulling across my chest beneath my sweater. I looked up at the house my late husband and I bought 36 years ago. The white shutters Daniel painted with his father during one humid summer vacation. The maple tree Richard planted before he passed away 6 years ago. The kitchen window where I used to wave goodbye every morning when Daniel left for school with his oversized backpack bouncing against his shoulders. Everything looked exactly the same. Except suddenly it wasn't my home anymore. I'll be all right, I whispered, though my voice barely sounded human. Weak. Hollow. Like someone speaking from underwater. The driver hesitated before lifting my suitcases closer to the porch. There were only 2 bags because Melissa had insisted she'd pack everything necessary, while I recovered in the hospital. At the time I thought she was trying to help. Melissa always knew exactly how to sound caring in front of other people. Nurses loved her. Doctors complimented her devotion. Your daughter is wonderful, one nurse told me the morning after surgery. I didn't correct her. It seemed easier than explaining that my real daughter died at 19, and the woman smiling beside my hospital bed was my daughter-in-law. The porch light suddenly switched off. Just like that. 1 second warm yellow light spilled across the front steps. The next second, darkness. I froze. My overnight bag slipped from my fingers onto the porch boards with a dull thud. Whoever stood behind those curtains wanted me to understand something very clearly. I was not welcome inside. My chest tightened painfully, and for one terrifying second, I thought something had gone wrong with my heart again. I pressed my hand carefully against my coat and forced myself to breathe slowly the way the nurse had taught me. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. Don't panic. Don't cry. Don't beg. Across the street, Mrs. Harper's living room television flickered blue through her curtains. A dog barked somewhere down the block. Life kept moving as if nothing extraordinary had happened. As if an old woman hadn't just been locked out of her own home hours after leaving the hospital. My phone buzzed inside my purse. Daniel's name lit up the screen. I answered immediately, relief flooding through me so fast it almost hurt. Daniel, I whispered. Honey, the garage code isn't working. Silence. Then a long exhale. Mom, he said quietly, please don't make this harder than it already is. I stood there gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white against the cold. Daniel had always hated conflict. Even as a little boy, he used to cry when neighborhood kids argued during baseball games. After his father died, that softness in him slowly changed into something else. Avoidance. Silence. Weakness disguised as peace. Harder for who? I asked quietly. I could hear Melissa's muffled voice somewhere in the background, sharp and impatient. Then a door closed. Daniel lowered his voice. Mom, you know your recovery is going to take time. Melissa and I talked, and we just think you would be more comfortable somewhere with professional care. Professional care. The words felt rehearsed, like something copied from a brochure. I stared at the dark kitchen window where I had baked birthday cakes for 40 years. Every Thanksgiving turkey. Every Christmas pie. Every late-night cup of tea after Richard's cancer treatments left him too weak to sleep. You could have talked to me first, I whispered. Daniel went silent again. That silence told me everything. This had not been a family discussion. This had been a decision. My son was simply delivering it. There is a motel about 10 minutes away, he finally said. I already paid for a room for the week. Not even an invitation to speak face to face. Not even enough respect to open the front door. Just a prepaid motel room and 2 suitcases left outside like forgotten luggage at an airport terminal. I closed my eyes for a moment because suddenly the porch felt unsteady beneath my feet. The pain medication from the hospital still lingered in my system, making everything feel distant and strangely slow. Across the yard, the wind chimes Richard bought me during our trip to Vermont rattled softly in the breeze. I remembered that weekend so clearly. We had rented a tiny cabin near the mountains. Daniel was 10 years old and spent 2 straight days trying to catch frogs in the creek behind the cabin. That little boy used to crawl into bed beside me during thunderstorms because he thought mothers could protect people from anything. Somewhere along the way, Melissa convinced him I was the storm. The taxi driver quietly loaded my bags back into the trunk, while I listened to my son explain why his own mother could not recover inside her own home. "It is temporary," Daniel said quickly, as though the speed of his words might soften them. "Once things settle down, we can figure something else out." Something else. I almost laughed at how carefully he avoided saying the words nursing home or assisted living. Melissa must have coached him on that too. Did Melissa write the note? I asked. Another silence. Longer this time. "Mom," he sighed, exhausted already, "please just try not to upset Sophie. She has been emotional about all this." Emotional. My 12-year-old granddaughter was upset, yet somehow nobody considered how it might feel for a 68-year-old widow to come home from heart surgery and find herself locked out in the cold. I ended the call before my voice could betray me. Then I climbed slowly back into the taxi while the porch light remained dark behind me. The motel smelled faintly like bleach and old carpet. The kind of place people stayed in when flights were canceled or marriages ended unexpectedly. Room 214 sat at the far end of the second floor overlooking the interstate. Every few minutes, headlights swept across the thin curtains, lighting the room in pale flashes before disappearing again into the night. I lowered myself carefully onto the edge of the bed, my chest aching from the strain of the day. The doctor had warned me not to lift anything heavier than 10 pounds for at least 6 weeks, but somehow I had managed 2 suitcases and the weight of realizing my own family no longer wanted me. The motel air conditioner rattled loudly beside the window even though the room still felt cold. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders and stared at my phone resting silently on the nightstand. No text from Melissa. No apology from Daniel. Nothing. It amazed me how quickly a person could become invisible inside their own life. Earlier that morning, nurses checked my blood pressure every hour. They asked whether I needed extra pillows. They walked slowly beside me down the hospital hallway while I practiced breathing exercises. By evening, I was alone in a roadside motel eating stale crackers from a vending machine because my son had decided his recovering mother no longer fit comfortably inside his household. I opened my purse looking for my medication and noticed my checkbook tucked inside beside an old photograph of Richard and me at Coney Island nearly 20 years ago. Daniel had taken the picture himself. Richard stood beside me holding a paper cup of lemonade, while the ocean stretched behind us bright and blue under the summer sun. We looked tired but happy. Cancer had already entered our lives by then, though we did not know it yet. Sometimes I think grief changes a family slowly, like water wearing down stone. After Richard died, Daniel stopped visiting as often. Melissa always had reasons. Soccer practice, school events, business dinners, traffic. Every explanation sounded reasonable on its own. Together, they built a wall brick by brick until suddenly I found myself standing outside of it. Around midnight, my phone buzzed unexpectedly. For one foolish second, hope rushed through me. Maybe Daniel had changed his mind. Maybe he was downstairs ready to bring me home. But the screen showed Sophie's name instead. My granddaughter rarely texted me directly because Melissa insisted children needed healthy digital boundaries. The message was short enough to fit entirely on the screen. "Grandma, are you okay? Mom said you are staying somewhere else now because you need special care." I stared at those words for a long time. Special care. Melissa had already started rewriting the story. By morning, I would probably become fragile, confused, difficult. The elderly woman who could not manage on her own anymore. I typed slowly because my hands would not stop trembling. "I am okay, sweetheart. I love you very much. Three dots appeared immediately as Sophie started typing again. Then stopped. Then started once more. Finally her message appeared. I did not want them to pack your things while you were still in surgery. My heart seemed to stop for one long terrible second. I read the sentence again. Then again. Outside, another truck roared past the motel window while I sat completely still on the edge of the bed, realizing this had not been a sudden decision at all. I did not sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my suitcases sitting on the porch beneath the darkened light. Around 3 in the morning, I finally gave up pretending rest would come and walked slowly to the motel window with a cup of weak coffee from the lobby downstairs. Rain had started falling over the interstate, turning the neon motel sign into blurry red smears against the glass. My reflection stared back at me, faint and exhausted. At 68 years old, I barely recognized the woman looking back. The surgery had left pale bruises across my arms where needles and monitors had been attached for days. My silver hair looked thinner than I remembered. But underneath the exhaustion, something else had begun settling quietly inside me during the long night. Not anger. Not yet. Clarity. Sophie's message replayed in my mind over and over. They packed your things while you were still in surgery. Not after. Not suddenly. While I lay unconscious in a hospital bed, trusting my family to care whether I survived. I sat back down carefully and began thinking about all the little moments I had ignored during the past year. Melissa insisting I move my favorite armchair out of the living room because it made the house look dated. Daniel changing the garage keypad without telling me because he claimed the old code was too easy for strangers to guess. Family dinners becoming less frequent until eventually Melissa started bringing me leftovers instead of inviting me downstairs to eat with them. At the time I told myself families changed. Children grew busy. Houses became crowded. I had spent my entire life smoothing rough edges, explaining away other people's coldness before it could hurt me too deeply. But alone in that motel room, the pattern finally stood fully formed in front of me. They had not been making less space for me emotionally. They had been preparing to remove me physically. My phone buzzed again shortly after sunrise. Another message from Sophie. This one came with a photo attached. My hand shook slightly as I opened it. It was my bedroom, or what used to be my bedroom. The pale yellow quilt Richard bought me during our 25th anniversary trip was gone from the bed. The framed photographs from my dresser had disappeared. Even the curtains I sewed myself nearly 30 years ago had been replaced with modern white blinds. In the center of the room sat a treadmill and a stationary bike still wrapped in plastic. Beneath the photo, Sophie typed only 4 words. Mom calls it the gym. I stared at the image for so long my eyes began burning. That room had once held a crib beside my bed when Daniel was a baby with chronic ear infections. Richard recovered there after chemotherapy treatments left him too weak to climb stairs. Every wall carried pieces of our family history. And Melissa erased it all before my hospital bracelet had even been removed. Another message appeared seconds later. Grandma, please do not tell them I texted you. I do not think Dad knows I still have your number saved. That hurt almost more than the photo itself. Not because my granddaughter was afraid of Melissa, because she was afraid of her own father too. The next morning, I used the motel hairdryer to warm my hands because the arthritis in my fingers had flared overnight from the cold. My chest still felt tight from surgery, and every movement pulled faintly against the healing incision beneath my sweater. The doctor had warned me recovery would take patience. He never warned me it would take homelessness too. I sat at the tiny motel table with a stale blueberry muffin and began sorting through the papers inside my purse. Insurance forms, prescription receipts, a folded church bulletin from 2 Sundays before my surgery. Beneath everything else, I found Richard's old business card holder made of worn brown leather. I almost smiled when I saw it. My husband never threw important documents away. During our marriage, he kept every warranty, tax record, and bank statement carefully organized inside labeled folders in the basement office. Melissa used to laugh about it during family dinners. Your father is preparing for the apocalypse, she once joked while Daniel chuckled beside her. But Richard always answered calmly. Someday being careful will protect someone. At the time I thought he meant Daniel. Now I was not so sure. Around noon my phone rang unexpectedly. The screen displayed a name I had not seen in almost 8 months. Harold Bennett, Richard's attorney. For a moment, I simply stared at the phone in confusion. Harold handled our estate planning years ago after Richard's diagnosis became serious. After the funeral, we rarely spoke except for Christmas cards and the occasional birthday message. I answered carefully. "Hello, Evelyn," Harold said gently. "I have been trying to reach your house since yesterday afternoon." Something in his tone made me sit up straighter immediately. "I was discharged from the hospital yesterday," I explained quietly. "I am staying somewhere else right now." Silence filled the line. For 2 long seconds. Then he spoke more slowly. "I see." Those 2 words carried the weight of understanding. Not surprise. Understanding. My fingers tightened around the phone. "Harold," I asked softly, "did Richard leave instructions about the house before he died?" Another pause. Papers shuffled faintly in the background. Then Harold cleared his throat. "Evelyn, I think it would be best if you came to my office this afternoon. There are several documents we should review together." My stomach tightened instantly. "What kind of documents?" "The kind your husband hoped would never become necessary." Outside the motel window, rainwater dripped steadily from the roof onto the parking lot below. A woman walked her small terrier across the sidewalk while traffic moved endlessly along the interstate beyond them. Everything looked painfully ordinary while my entire life quietly shifted beneath my feet again. Harold gave me the office address, though I already knew it by heart. Richard and I sat together in that same office 12 years earlier discussing wills after his second round of treatments failed. I still remembered the smell of Harold's coffee and the sound of Richard joking weakly about how much paperwork dying required in America. Before ending the call, Harold spoke again, his voice unusually firm this time. "Evelyn, whatever has happened, do not sign anything your son or daughter-in-law place in front of you." "Not yet." The line disconnected softly afterward, but I remained frozen at the motel table staring at the rain outside while something cold and sharp slowly settled into place inside my chest. Richard knew. Somehow, years before his death, my husband already knew this day might come. Harold's office sat on the 3rd floor of an old brick building downtown beside the courthouse. Richard used to joke that the elevator there was older than our marriage because it groaned so loudly every time it moved. Hearing that same sound again nearly unraveled me before I even stepped inside. The receptionist recognized me immediately and gave me the kind of careful smile people reserve for funerals and hospital waiting rooms. "Mr. Bennett is expecting you," she said softly. Harold stood when I entered his office. He looked older than I remembered. Thinner too. His gray hair had receded farther back from his forehead, and reading glasses hung low against his nose as though he had been studying paperwork all morning. But his eyes remained sharp, concerned. He walked around the desk and hugged me gently without speaking. That alone told me this meeting would change something important. I sat carefully in the leather chair across from him while rain tapped steadily against the office windows. For a moment neither of us spoke. Harold simply opened a thick folder resting on his desk and slid several papers toward me. I recognized Richard's handwriting immediately on the yellow sticky notes attached to the corners. My throat tightened. "About 2 years before Richard passed," Harold began quietly, "he updated several estate documents after a private conversation we had concerning the house and your future care." My eyes moved slowly across the paperwork, though the legal language blurred together at first. Trust agreements, property clauses, medical directives. Then one sentence finally settled clearly into focus. "The family residence located on Willow Creek Drive shall remain under irrevocable trust protection for the lifetime benefit and housing security of Evelyn Carter." I looked up sharply. Harold nodded once. "The house legally cannot be sold, transferred, refinanced, or modified without your direct written consent." My heart started beating harder against my ribs. "Daniel told me the house belonged to him now," I whispered. Harold removed his glasses slowly. "No, Evelyn. Richard specifically prevented that from happening." Outside the office window, a police siren wailed faintly somewhere downtown before fading into the distance. I stared back down at the documents while pieces of the past suddenly rearranged themselves inside my mind. Richard staying awake late in the basement office months before he died. Quiet meetings with Harold that he described only as paperwork. The night he sat beside me in bed holding my hand longer than usual while asking me to promise I would never let anyone pressure me after he was gone. At the time I thought he was afraid I would become lonely. Now I understood he had been afraid of something else entirely. Harold reached deeper into the folder and removed one final document sealed inside a transparent sleeve. "There is more," he said carefully. "A conditional inheritance clause." My stomach tightened instantly. "What kind of clause?" Harold hesitated before answering. "If any beneficiary deliberately attempts to remove you from the home against your wishes, their inheritance rights are suspended pending legal review." The room went completely still around me. I could actually hear the ticking wall clock behind Harold's desk. "Richard believed financial pressure might someday influence Daniel's judgment," Harold said quietly. "He wanted to make sure you would always have protection." For several seconds I could not speak at all. Because suddenly the motel room, the packed suitcases, the dark porch light, even Melissa's rehearsed sympathy all looked different now. They had not just abandoned me. They had made a very expensive mistake. When I left Harold's office that afternoon, the rain had finally stopped. The sidewalks downtown glistened beneath weak autumn sunlight while people hurried past carrying coffee cups and grocery bags, completely unaware that my entire understanding of my family had shifted in less than an hour. I sat inside my car for several minutes without turning the engine on. Harold had insisted on arranging a rental vehicle for me after learning I had arrived by taxi. "You are going to need independence right now," he said firmly while handing me the keys. Independence. The word sounded strange after spending so many years trying not to inconvenience anyone. My phone buzzed before I even backed out of the parking space. "Daniel." I let it ring twice before answering. "Mom," he said quickly, relief flooding his voice. "Finally. I have been trying to reach you all afternoon." I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 3 missed calls. 2 voicemails. 1 text message asking where I was. Funny how concern appears the moment control starts slipping away. "I had an appointment," I answered calmly. "With who?" The question came too fast, too sharp. Not the voice of a worried son. The voice of someone trying to assess a threat. I looked through the windshield at courthouse steps covered in wet leaves. "An old friend of your father's." Silence settled over the line instantly. I could almost hear Daniel thinking. Then Melissa's voice drifted faintly through the background. "Ask her if she signed anything yet." My fingers tightened slightly around the steering wheel. "Signed anything?" Not "are you feeling better?" Not "did the doctor clear you to drive?" Paperwork mattered more than my recovery now. Daniel lowered his voice. "Mom, Melissa and I were hoping we could all sit down tonight and talk through everything calmly." Calmly. Another carefully chosen word. I remembered how Melissa used that same tone whenever Sophie cried after being punished. Soft voice. Tight smile. Controlled patience that somehow always made the other person feel unreasonable. "There is nothing to talk through," I said quietly. "Actually," Daniel replied too quickly, "there is something important you should know. We have already started discussions about selling the house." I closed my eyes briefly. There it was. Finally spoken aloud. Not concern for my health. Not family harmony. The house. Harold had been right. "That may become complicated," I answered carefully. Another silence followed. Longer this time. Then Melissa's voice came through clearly from beside him, no longer bothering to whisper. "What does that mean?" The question sounded cold and direct, stripped of all the sweetness she performed in front of neighbors and nurses. I pictured her standing in my kitchen beside the marble countertops Richard installed himself 20 years ago, probably holding one of my coffee mugs while discussing how to erase me from the property entirely. "It means," I said slowly, "that your father apparently planned more carefully than either of you realized." No one spoke after that. For several seconds all I heard was breathing on the other end of the line. Then the call disconnected abruptly. I sat motionless inside the rental car while a strange feeling settled quietly into my chest for the first time since leaving the hospital. Not triumph. Not revenge. Stability. Because after days of feeling discarded and powerless, I finally understood something important. Richard did not leave me helpless. He left me protected. That evening I did something I had not done in years. I drove past my own house without stopping. The sun had already started sinking behind the trees lining Willow Creek Drive, painting the neighborhood in soft orange light. Families walked dogs along the sidewalks. Sprinklers clicked steadily across green lawns. Everything looked peaceful from the outside. Normal. But when I slowed near the corner, I noticed two unfamiliar vehicles parked in my driveway. One belonged to a real estate company. The other was a moving truck. I kept driving. Slowly. Quietly. My hands remained steady on the steering wheel even though my stomach twisted painfully beneath the seatbelt. Through the front window, I could see Melissa moving through the living room carrying decorative pillows in her arms. Staging the house already. Richard's old leather recliner was gone from its usual spot beside the fireplace. The blue antique lamp my mother left me had disappeared too. My entire life was being erased room by room, while I recovered from surgery in a motel off the interstate. As I turned onto the next street, my phone buzzed again. This time it was not Daniel. It was Sophie. Grandma, are you nearby? I hesitated before answering. Yes, sweetheart. Why? 3 dots appeared immediately. Then another message followed. They are fighting. I pulled into an empty church parking lot and read the next message slowly. Mom says Dad should have checked the trust papers before they told you to leave. For a moment I simply stared at the screen. Not because the words surprised me anymore. Because of how casually they confirmed everything Harold warned me about. Melissa had never wanted distance. She wanted ownership. The house. The property value. The inheritance. Daniel probably convinced himself this had all been temporary and practical in the beginning. But Melissa had already been planning renovations before my hospital discharge papers were even signed. Another text appeared. Dad looked scared. That one hurt. Unexpectedly. Because despite everything, I still remembered the little boy who used to hold my hand crossing parking lots. The teenager who cried quietly at Richard's funeral because he thought real men were supposed to stay strong. Somewhere over the years, fear turned him weak. Weak enough to let someone colder than him make decisions he could not undo. I rested my forehead briefly against the steering wheel while church bells rang faintly somewhere nearby announcing 6 o'clock mass. My medication bottle rattled softly inside my purse beside Richard's photograph. For the first time since this nightmare began, I realized something important. I no longer wanted to go back into that house as a guest begging for kindness. If I returned, it would be because the home still belonged to me too. Not emotionally. Legally. My phone rang seconds later. Daniel again. This time when I answered, his breathing sounded uneven. Mom, he said quietly. Melissa just spoke with the realtor. I waited silently. He swallowed hard before continuing. Apparently the sale cannot move forward unless you personally approve it. Outside the windshield, the church doors opened and families stepped into the evening light together while my son finally began understanding the cost of locking his mother out. Daniel asked if we could meet the next morning. Not at the house. Not at the motel. A diner halfway between both places, as though neutral territory might somehow soften what had already happened. I arrived 10 minutes early because Richard always believed punctuality was a form of respect. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and maple syrup, and soft country music drifted through old ceiling speakers while waitresses carried plates stacked with pancakes and bacon to families beginning their Saturday mornings. I chose a booth near the window where the sunlight touched the table. When Daniel walked in, I barely recognized how tired he looked. His shoulders sagged beneath a wrinkled navy sweater, and dark circles shadowed his eyes like bruises from sleepless nights. For a second, I saw the boy he used to be again. Then he sat down across from me and avoided looking directly into my face. Mom, he began quietly, I think things got out of hand. Out of hand. Such small words for leaving your recovering mother outside in the cold with suitcases on the porch. The waitress appeared beside us holding 2 menus, but Daniel shook his head immediately. Just coffee, he muttered. I ordered tea. Richard always said difficult conversations should never happen on an empty stomach, but suddenly I realized my husband had spent years preparing me for disappointment without my noticing. Daniel rubbed both hands together nervously before finally speaking again. Melissa did not understand the trust situation. There it was again. Not regret. Not apology. Logistics. Paperwork. Legal complications. I looked out the diner window at a father helping his little girl zip her pink jacket before crossing the parking lot. Did you? I asked softly. Daniel swallowed hard. Mom, I knew Dad left protections in place, but Melissa thought. He stopped himself too late. Melissa thought. Meaning they discussed this together. Planned together. My chest tightened painfully beneath my coat, though not from surgery this time. How long? I asked quietly. He looked confused. How long what? How long were you planning to remove me from the house? His face drained of color instantly. Daniel stared down at the coffee cup the waitress had just placed in front of him, as though steam rising from the dark liquid might hide him from the truth. Finally he whispered, "Since before your operation." Around us forks clinked against plates. Someone laughed near the counter. Life continued normally while my son admitted he and his wife prepared to erase me before doctors even wheeled me into surgery. I reached slowly into my purse and removed the folded note taped to my suitcase. The paper had softened from being opened too many times. I placed it carefully on the table between us. Daniel stared at his own handwriting at the bottom beneath Melissa's message. His signature looked shaky now. Human. Regretful. You packed my things while I was unconscious, I said calmly. Then you locked the doors before I came home. His eyes filled immediately. Mom, I never wanted you hurt. I believed him. That was the tragedy of it. Daniel did not want cruelty. He simply lacked the strength to stop someone else from choosing it for him. I folded the note again slowly and returned it to my purse beside Richard's photograph. Then I looked at my son for a long moment before speaking the sentence that finally made him break eye contact completely. Your father spent years protecting me from this exact moment because he knew someday you might fail to.